Well, thank you, Andrew, for that introduction. I come to this as someone who discovered this territory for intellectual exploration in mid-career. As a young philosophy student, I recall having more than an average interest in the subject of miracles, and I asked my professors, I looked around, and basically what I was told was, well, there's Hume, and then there's some modern pieces that tell you about Hume. There are a few crazies who disagree with Hume, and that's it, as if David Hume had both inaugurated and terminated the discussion of miracles and divine action, at least as a ground for religious belief. That was frustrating to me, but for a while I knew no better, right? You turn to the authorities, they tell you what you're supposed to be reading, you do what they tell you, and so there it lay for a while. But whenever something's been walled off, there are usually some hidden doorways in. So one of the doorways in for me was the philosophy of science. It may surprise some people to realize that you cannot pick up classic works in the history and philosophy of science without discovering that these people saw no barrier to the discussion of these issues. So, for example, in the Leibniz-Clark correspondence, we have a discussion of questions of absolute space and time in the Newtonian worldview, but it moves very quickly in a very different direction. And for those who have the fortitude to wade through some of that correspondence, you will discover that soon enough, Leibniz and Clark are accusing one another of having a view that is inadequate because it would, in the nature of the case, forbid God to act in certain ways. This is not something they're shy about discussing. Newton, in the third book of his Principia, very overtly in his famous General Scholium, discusses the question of divine intervention in the world. And in a letter to Richard Bentley, he says that he'd be very pleased if his work were to serve to support belief in divine action. And it was to that end, he says, that I composed it. Robert Boyle, certainly a major name in the history of science, made signal contributions to our understanding of chemistry, his air pumps and experiments with vacua, but he was also keenly interested in questions of miracle and in fact wrote a letter, unpublished, but lying in the Royal Society archives, and I might have a copy of it if you want, in which he criticizes the views of Spinoza and certain people who are retailing Spinoza to an English-speaking audience. He also wrote an entire book, The Christian Virtuoso, saying, you know, if we really want to understand these things, the best thing to do is to have a full understanding of the scope and the limits of what nature can do, because then and only then could you identify something that was not something nature could have produced by itself. So some of these great names contributed to this discussion, and once you realize they were in it, it's hard to stuff that genie back into the bottle. And names also that we've forgotten. Thomas Sherlock, writing in 1729, has a very articulate discussion of the admissibility of testimony to the miraculous. Can we even listen to testimony like that? Could we, in principle, take that, be serious about it, and think of that as evidence for the miraculous? Hume was born in 1711. This is not something he's borrowing from Hume. In fact, the entire argument of the first section of Hume's famous essay of miracles is laid out in detail in a sermon by Robert South, who died when Hume was about 5 years old. Discovering this literature was the single most important event of my professional life, and it has changed my view of scholarship and my view of the range of issues that one can discuss as a contemporary analytical philosopher with an interest in science and a love of science. So this has changed the shape of my research, and once that happens to you, of course, you want to do that for other people, you want to make that available to them, and that's why we designed the course that Andrew was mentioning. This was an 8-week online course, and I was apprehensive for both of those reasons. Number one, 8 weeks is a short time, and there was a lot I wanted to do. And number two, I'd never done an online course before. Where's John's up here? John, raise a hand. Dan, where's Dan? These guys saved my sanity because they helped me with the technical side of the course. I would say, well, we need to shift this around and change that and do that. They would just go in and handle it. So bless you guys. I could not have done it without your assistance. We had 13 students who signed up for the course. There was a remarkable range of students. We had some hand-selected undergraduates. I was very picky about this. I wanted to get the people that I knew already and on independent grounds were geniuses. And I managed to do that. I played a little bit of the recruiter for that. We had someone who completed the defense of her dissertation in Prague while taking this course. We had someone who was doing this course just before moving on to go to med school at the University of Michigan. We had somebody who had already taken a master's degree in philosophy but wanted to come back and get this material. I had a computer security specialist who used to work in Australia for Microsoft. This interested him. He was in and fully engaged. So really a remarkable range of people. And I knew that we were going to get them. What I didn't realize is that word would get out. And so a few weeks into the course, extra names started popping up on the screen. I had somebody logged in twice. Oh, it turns out that someone else in Prague wanted to sit in on it, and he is an extremely distinguished philosopher at the height of his career and was sitting in on my class. There was a young student from India who wrote to me asking about the possibility of studying philosophy at the graduate level. In a country where the median income is below $5 a day, that's hard. So I said, well, look, we can work on it, but meanwhile, why don't you sit in on this course? She did, and she interacted with that. So we had reach in directions. I had a housewife in Texas. I had people from all over the place coming in, sitting in, participating, actually asking questions then, which was fantastic and more than I could have anticipated. For the mechanics of the course, we were using the database, which is in development. Neil's our man for that. You're going to hear from him in a little while, and Neil gave us a very powerful amount of support for that. We read, I'm afraid I assigned over 1,000 pages of reading for those 8 weeks, and that was hard to get it down from the 4,000 or 5,000 I wanted to assign. But people kept up with it like troopers. I was amazed. We met twice a week in a virtual classroom. No pre-recorded lectures. Everything was done live. That's one of the things that I really didn't want to do, that I've heard about online classes. Yeah, the professors recorded all the lectures. You go, you watch it all, and then you write a paper, and at the end the professor shows up to do some grading. We didn't do that. We had live lectures, we had interactive questions, and so managed to log a great deal of that, and that was, I think, something of real benefit to the students. We also had discussions online. We recorded all of the lectures. Some of that material will eventually find its way into the archives of the project. One of the things that I think is very important for young thinkers is to find their heroes. There's a beautiful line in the movie Shadowlands about the life of C.S. Lewis. It's not something found in Lewis's own writings, but it works very well in the movie, and that is, we read to know that we are not alone. It was immensely gratifying to me to find that these students actually did find they were not alone. I've had some of them write me personal notes about the course. I don't have yet permission from them to share those notes. We are collecting some data. The data will ultimately be part of what we put into the project, but those data are not fully collected yet. However, this generation tells you what it really thinks in one unmistakable way. They post it on Facebook. Here are comments from 5 or 6 of the students, different students, all of them, about the things they were reading as they were posting quotations. One student said, "There is so much of value in Butler. I'm having a hard time figuring out what I should quote and to what I should merely refer. Another student, another gem, and then a long quotation from Bishop Edward Chandler, who is probably not high on the reading list of anyone who's doing the history of philosophy. A different student, another little gem from Alciphron. He's reading the most neglected of George Berkeley's works. A different student, Leland solves this problem, he articulates. He says he solves it in a single paragraph, centuries before contemporary philosophy of religion. Someone responding to that said, that's funny, I made note of that same passage as well. Very impressed so far with Leland. And finally, one of my favorites, one student put up on his homepage, these early debates are exemplary of how these sorts of issues should be addressed with seriousness, dignity, fairness, and cautious philosophical investigation. Strive to exemplify these virtues. That does it for me. That would be enough to justify the course in my view, if that were all the feedback that I had. And I have more. I've had to suppress. I've got like a little row of asterisks and then more quotations. I'm not going to read them all at you. Strive to exemplify these virtues, yes, and the virtue of knowing what has been said and thinking about it seriously. This is as relevant as this week. I'll give you two examples. Last week, I taped a radio debate with a fairly eminent New Testament scholar, Bart Ehrman. Bart has a great deal of confidence in his position, but he has not explored these issues with the eyes of someone who's familiar with the history of it. And I found myself drawing on the work of John Douglas, one of the many contributors to the deist controversy late, when it came to dealing with one of Bart's criticisms, or actually one of his examples that he was bringing forward. This week, there's a set of articles out on this topic coming from all different perspectives. In Slate, Len Goodman has contributed one of those. I wrote one of them. Andrew had a piece there, and I think others in this room also. Susan has one there. The issues that are being discussed and the places where people are talking past one another in the contemporary discourses are places that could be illuminated and should be illuminated by an appreciation of this material. So this conference we're structuring somewhat as a workshop. It's not just, hey, there's a bunch of papers, come, listen, go home, put it on your CV, wait 2 years, then throw away the conference binder. We're supposed to be interacting with one another. Let's do that. I'd love to talk with you. You disagree with me? That's great. We're going to disagree with one another. That's fine. Let's talk. You have ideas. Let's hear it. You want to swap resources? Wonderful. Have we got a show for you? So let's not make this just another come and go home conference. Let's actually do some interactive work on this. I think I can speak for many of the other people who are speaking here when I say we'd love to sit down and talk with anybody. So if you have thoughts about this, ideas, avenues to pursue, questions about where to publish something, let's make this as interactive as we possibly can. Thank you.